And Carhart Harris's view of it is that when we were at earlier stages of mankind, our primary consciousness was a lot more open. And as we went along, it began to become narrower, more rigid. So he states that there are a range, spectrum of cognitive states of the mind. And he uses the word entropy. Entropy means expansion and contraction. Entropy is expanding outward. And so he sees the cognitive states ranging from high entropy mental states. That's where your mental states are open, and you're open to a variety of states of consciousness, basically. All the way down to low entropy mental states. That's where there's little or no openness to the mental state. No expansion. So at the high entropy end of the spectrum is these psychedelic states, these other states of consciousness. And at the low end, rigid thinking, addiction, obsessive compulsive disorder, depression, and finally coma. Now, if you think about the main issues that we're dealing with in the world today, some of the main illnesses are just what he describes as being low entropy, result of low entropy mind addiction. That's huge. Obsessive compulsive disorder. There's lots of people suffering with that. Depression as well. Depression is a worldwide epidemic, as a matter of fact. So these things we're struggling with as a people are part of low entropy mental states. So it stands to reason that if we can help people move to a high entropy mental state, we can help deal with these situations such as addiction and obsessions and eating disorders and depression. And some of the research that's being done with psychedelics is that they may be the answer to sort of breaking through the narrow rigidness and opening up the mind again. So a high entropy mental state is something that we all have experienced, because we have all experienced it when we were babies, as young children. Baby mind is very different from adult mind. And psychologist and philosopher Alison Gopnik talks quite their openness, their ability to see things, to imagine things. If you've ever sat down and talked with a 2 or 3-year-old or a 4-year-old or even a 5-year-old, it's very much like tripping. Okay? So if I were to say to you, you have the mind of a 2-year-old, You think I was insulting you. You think I was calling you stupid or something. But I would actually be paying you a compliment, saying that you have the openness of mind and the creativity to experience things in a much different way than most adults do. And Gopnik uses phrases like spotlight consciousness to describe adult consciousness, which tends to focus on very, very specific things and meeting very narrowly defined goals. She also calls this a sort of sense of ego consciousness. This is who I am. This is what needs to be done, so on and so forth. Whereas young children's consciousness is what she calls lantern consciousness. It spreads out and kind of gives an illumination of everything it possibly can. That means they're willing to try new and untried things without being pulled back by previous experiences that they've processed because they haven't had them. And the idea is that you can return to that state of consciousness for periods of time when necessary, when needed. Because that consciousness gets eclipsed very easily as we pass a certain age. And it's just due to the environment we're in. But when we're in an environment, like in these happy countries, where our D needs are being met, that frees our consciousness up to become higher entropy consciousness, to become more like baby consciousness, the consciousness we had as kids. It's fascinating stuff. And we will be continuing our talk about consciousness research. I think it's so important. And while I talk about these researchers all the time, they're still very much in the minority. There's been so little research on consciousness. We still don't know what it is, or science still doesn't know what it is. Much of traditional science continues to believe, that consciousness is somehow in the brain somewhere, though they have no evidence to support that particularly, and they've yet to find anything definitive to point to support that idea. But that's their belief system, because their science is built around that. So consciousness has to come out of the brain, as opposed to there being consciousness out there that we are a part of, and maybe creates and affects our brain, but is not created by the brain. So, in fact, the exact opposite of what traditional science believes. And if you look at the research, there's actually more pointing in that direction than in the direction of traditional science. But many don't want to look at that. So I think it's worth having discussions about that, as well as the idea of happiness. And as we evolve as a culture and a country, perhaps we will begin to incorporate this more into our political systems and our daily world. Until next time, be well.